So today I want to talk about the emotion roadmap and accountability. How do you hold people accountable? What do they feel like when you talk about accountability? It scares people often. People are often very uncomfortable with the idea of being held accountable. Not everyone, of course. Some people really enjoy the idea that everyone's accountable. They depend on it, in fact. But lots of people find it uncomfortable when you talk about accountability. They somehow feel like you're going to catch them doing something wrong. They may get anxious, defensive, or upset when you talk about accountability. When people go into organizations and they start talking about, we need to start having everyone be accountable, everyone gets a little bit uptight when they feel as though somehow something they're doing isn't quite right. And yet, we depend on accountability. The more accountable each person is, the more you can empower them. The more you can depend on someone, the more you can trust someone to do what they say that they're going to do, to get it done in the way that they say they're going to get it done, in the time, on budget, high quality. When you can count on people for that and everybody feels like everyone else is accountable, you have high performance, a high performing organization. But how do you get there? When you bring up the idea of being accountable, it's going to cause some people to be concerned. You ask yourself, when you use the emotion roadmap, if what I'm likely to encounter in terms of the feelings I create when I bring up a particular topic is going to be unpleasant, cause people to be more frightened than to be more supported. How do I turn that around? How do I get people, when we talk about accountability, to feel open about it, supported by it, appreciated and inspired and engaged? How do we do that? Well, one of the things that it needs to start with is this idea that people have to feel as though you're doing accountability with dignity. They have to be seen in the same light. You want to be able to hold people accountable at the same time you maintain their dignity. Now, we know from lots of history and lots of research that the whole idea of holding people accountable is often thought about in performance appraisal time. And I'm talking about this topic now, in part because typically the time for performance appraisals show up at the end of the year. Sometimes they actually take place at the beginning of the next year as a review of the year just finished. But they're often thought about in the end of the third quarter, the beginning of the fourth quarter. And so somewhere in those time frames, people are going to be having conversations with one another about whether or not people were accountable. What's it mean to be accountable? What specifically are we talking about? We talk about accountability in terms of knowing what's expected. What are clear expectations for accountability? How are we going to share with people exactly what we're looking for when we talk about holding them accountable? When you set out the beginning of the year, typically sometime towards the end of one year and the beginning of the next, this idea that people are going to be accountable, and you talk about accountability, you talk about it in terms of expectations. What exactly are you accountable for? So the first step is to be crystal clear about what you expect. Sometimes you want to even talk about not only what someone's going to get done for you in the particular role that they hold, what their responsibilities are, but you also want to talk about how they get things done, the way they carry things out, the style you embrace for your organization, the culture you want. How do you make sure you're creating a highly healthy culture and not a toxic culture? Well, one of the things that causes the ability to generate accountability in a healthy way is to have clear expectations. So let's assume that you've got clarity with the people that you work with and you want to talk to them about what they need to get the role done. What are the skills that they have to have? What do they need to be good at the beginning of the year? Sometimes the skills you need in one year are quite different the following year. For example, if you're doing a lot of routine work in one year and the next year you have a major project that's going to introduce a new initiative, a new product, an organizational change, you may need very different skills than the year before. So are you clear when you set the expectations also Are you clear about the skill set that's necessary, the resources that are necessary, the support that's necessary? Is all that clear to you? And if it is, that's a good way to start. You want to make sure the person that you're talking to about being accountable feels he or she or they actually have all that they need in the way of tools, resources, and skills. And then how are we going to measure accountability? What measurements, in fact, are important to have? A lot of jobs, you can measure the number of widgets produced in a manufacturing site, for instance. But many of the professional jobs we hold today are much more difficult to measure, and we have a lot of subjective measures we introduce. Whatever those measures are, however we can, as specifically as possible, define those measures, we want to be clear with the person we're talking to who needs to be accountable, what the measures are, and periodically talk about those measures, because what we might start off saying may change over time. So nothing frustrates leaders more than being surprised by failure. And so when we are talking about measurement, and people know they're going to be measured, and they know at specific times that a leader is going to be coming to them and asking about measurement and how they're doing. How do we get people to want to tell us when they're failing? How do we want to do that? One of my good friends, a fellow named John Caparella, an outstanding leader, in my opinion, who has led as many as tens of thousands of people in the hospitality industry at different points in his career, talks about the importance of recognizing that people need to know it's okay to fail. He once described himself when he was the general manager in a very large hotel and convention center. He once said that, one of the things that struck me is it's counterintuitive to want to tell anybody you work for that you're not going to make it on time, that you're going to fail actually. And yet, if they view me as the chief accountability officer and I'm going to punish them somehow, they'll never tell me on time. But if they see me as the chief resource officer, as someone that if they let me know early enough that we're not going to be successful here, or the timing is going to be off, or something isn't in place that needs to be, if they let me know early, when they first suspect that they might fail at something, I can reallocate resources to them. I can't do that if they don't tell me to the last minute when it's too late to make any changes. But if you tell me early on, then maybe you don't actually fail. Maybe we figure something out. You can't be afraid of failure. You need to understand that failure is a way of learning and growing. You don't want to keep failing at the same things. If that's the case, you don't get to stay. But if you fail at something, you learn from it, you grow from it. We have a growth mindset, if you will, that we're constantly learning, we're constantly growing, and we're allowing ourselves to admit to failure. We announce it early on if we think we're going to fail, and we see if there's some changes we can make to prevent that actual failure from taking place. Sometimes you can't, but the earlier you know, the quicker you can do something that's going to offset the implications of not telling somebody you failed until the very last minute. We also want to know how to give feedback to each other. Feedback is tricky. This is where dignity comes in. How do we maintain someone's dignity at the same time we're trying to be a critic, a constructive critic, to suggest that there's a different and better way to do something than the current way that they're handling the situation today? How do we change that up? How do we make that better? Well, one way to think about that, and I like to think about this in terms of the emotion roadmap, is to consider when you first sit down and talk with someone about how they're doing, and you want to provide feedback, whether it's a formal review or just something that you've done pretty regularly throughout the year, you want to think about how do you set the tone when you first sit down? What do you want to feel when you and the person that are going to talk about some changes in behavior that you're looking to see, or some different ways of handling some things, or different style perhaps than what the person is comfortable using? You want them to use a style perhaps that's more collaborative rather than one that's more authoritative. That's often the case. How do you do it? How do you get that done? Well, I like to think when I'm sitting down with someone for a challenging conversation, I like to think of it as in three parts. The first part is, how do I establish the tone? How do I get both of us to feel respectful, supported, appreciated, valued, key is respect, and how do we maintain someone's dignity? All that is in the very beginning when I set the tone. I'm thinking about that for myself and the person I'm talking to. Then when we get to talking about the things that are really challenging, the things that strike us as something that the other person may have a hard time hearing, I want to be really focused on that person. I want to really watch how they are receiving what I'm sending in terms of the message. Are they receiving it the way I intend? I want this message to be supportive. I want them to understand that, hey, this is something that's happening right now. I need to learn what's going on and why in order to help you and I be successful here. I have a suspicion that something isn't quite right. And so I want to talk about that with you. And I want to talk about it in a way that we both learn and grow from this experience. I want to talk about this with you so you and I can be successful in this instance. And I want to support you. So let's have an open conversation about what needs to be talked about. And then as I'm telling them what I'm saying, I'm listening to see if maybe I missed something. I don't want to be certain that I know exactly what's happening and why without fully understanding their point of view, their understanding of the circumstance or situation. I want to really be listening intently to hear how they're feeling, what they're thinking, and why they're behaving the way they are, and why they've chosen to do what they're doing. I may not be comfortable with at the moment. And maybe in my listening, I get more comfortable. We don't have to change anything. It's just more about me understanding why certain things are happening the way they are. On the other hand, maybe after I listen and understand their point of view, I say, I understood and heard you. Let me make sure I heard you. And you kind of repeat back to them what their explanation was to you so that they know that you heard them the way they intended. And then you say, and this is why I'd like to see us do it differently. This is how I'd like to see it done, as opposed to what you've suggested or what you've actually begun already. What do you think about that? How do you feel about that? Can you see why I want to do it differently? Can you understand my rationale? So what did we learn here from our conversation doing this? Have we learned something useful? I hope what we've learned is that we can be open with one another. So perhaps there will be times that I will change the way I feel about something that I'm not comfortable with based on you helping me understand why you're doing what you're doing, and I go along with it. On the other hand, there will be times when I see something that I need you to change, and hopefully you'll be open and accepting and appreciative of the point of view that I bring, and you'll be willing and able to change. That's the kind of conversation we want to have so that when we're all done, this is the third part, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. At the end of the conversation, I'd like you to feel supported, appreciated, and valued, respected, and dignified. And so I would like you to feel that way about me too. I want to feel that way walking out the door. I want you to feel that way walking out the door. So when we maintain dignity while we're holding people accountable, I think the whole organization benefits because everybody I've ever come into contact with appreciates when the person that they depend on to get something to them so that they can do their work in a quality way, on time, on budget, when things are given to them when they're supposed to be done. Everyone appreciates that. Now, it's impossible to get that right all the time. So when we can't get it right, when we know it's not going to succeed, we need as early as possible to let somebody know we are not going to make the deadline, or it's not going to be the quality that we wanted, or something else. But we let people know so that the person in charge, the chief resource officer, can perhaps allocate resources differently than what was initially intended, and maybe make sure we don't fail, or if we are going to fail and there's no turning back from that. Again, we look to see what we can learn, how we can move forward, how we can fix whatever the circumstance is as best we can. And we always do it with dignity. So remember, when you're trying to hold somebody accountable, make sure that you consider the aspect of dignity as a key point.